Hey folks, this is Rant and Fury with another Ballistic Rants commentary and advice, I guess you could say. I know I was supposed to do like a part 3 on the 38 special as far as what guns it comes in. Well, I've only had 2 that I could fire it in. That was a old Taurus revolver and the Ruger GP 100, which I've covered before. So instead of going over guns I've never had before, I decided to go down the rabbit hole. What makes a good reloading manual? This is the Lyman 47th edition. It's about 30 years old or more. I got it back in 94, 95. I can't quite remember. That's how memory goes after about 3 decades. Whenever I bought my first reloading kit, which was the Lyman Crusher press, which was in the Lyman orange at the time. Now it's a black one. I've since stripped the worn paint off of it, primed it, and put a similar finish on it to the Model 4500 Lubricizer, but that's getting ahead of the game. The kit came with a case trimmer, the powder scale, and the single stage press, and this book. I'm not going to go over too much of it, but this type of layout has the basic starting charge and the maximum charge for each powder for the calibers that they reviewed. The background of the cartridge is very sparse, but it was a good way of getting into it. One thing I liked about this book was the mechanics. It taught me how to reload in a time before YouTube and I knew anybody else that really reloaded that I could get some pointers from. There was one friend of my dad's that did, but unfortunately I wasn't able to hang around them much. So this book showed me how to, well, here's the history section as far as ballistics goes. But it showed me how to set up the press as far as the shell holder goes. The recording the data in a logbook, which is very important. It had a sample sheet in the back, which I tore out and made copies of, and I still use it in one of my older books. It also had stuff like rough powder characteristics as far as your flake, your stick, your ball, and some of the others. It showed stuff like trimming the casing, why it's important. You keep track of how many times you fired your brass. And one of them I just passed by, case head separation. That's where the brass gets stretched too thin, comes apart. And sometimes it takes an act of God to get it out of your chamber because it's stuck. Case prep, your tumbling and stuff. Now granted, this was a book to mainly sell the Lyman press and equipment, but when it comes to components like powder, your bullets, your primers, and your casings, Lyman was pretty impartial. Wasn't too long after this, I got a Hodgdon powder manual, and it had a little bit more of the history. It had some of the same stuff like case length, trim tube length, maximum overall, that kind of thing. But they also had reloads in it for IMR, Alliant, and Accurate Arms. Now at the time, in the mid-90s, Hodgdon was just a solo company. They just owned their own brand of powder. And the other brands, they kind of showed data that underloaded the cartridge instead of the full potential. They didn't want to show, I guess, perhaps a competitor's powder being just as competent. Now, this was in the time before the internet. I know, I'm that old. And even at that time, Windows 96 was still being developed, if you could call it that. Still like to crash like a kamikaze drunk on sake, but that's neither here nor there. Nobody figured out the online liabilities of publishing reloaded data online. But since then, Hodgdon has bought out the IMR powder brand. They bought out Accurate Arms. They also bought out the old Winchester Olin powder manufacturing part of the business. I guess the conglomerate that owned Winchester separated them and sold the components to Hodgdon. Maybe the primers went to Spear or RCBS Group, I forget which. So now you go online to their data. The IMR is rated to get velocities just as much as the equivalent in the Hodgdon now. Now, some of the other manuals I had was, well, one of them's right here, and this is the newer version. I've got one of the older, but I've got the Sierra, and this is the current one, so it's got the 6.5 Creedmoor. I know that's going to be a hot take, but it has the bracket as far as in 100 feet per second muzzle velocity, and some of the powders won't even show up in the lowest bracket. It'll show up like 1 or 2 over, then it'll go to the maximum speed. Well, some of the powders won't even reach that before they max out because of pressures. But you can start, and you always want to do the start and load and work your way up for safety's sake, and examine your casings afterwards, because you're basically making a pressure device that could blow up in your face if you're not careful. Now, Hornady, Sierra, Nosler, they all have that same type of velocity layout. They don't care whose powders they use as long as they have good results, and a lot of times they will suggest the accurate load. It may not be the most accurate for your gun, so you're still going to have to work up your own load, but it'll get you in the ballpark. Now, I keep the old 47s here because I've got post-it notes and scribbled in some on the pages as far as notes from way back when, and it's kind of interesting to look back through it, even though this isn't the most up-to-date, and rediscover some of the stuff I was experimenting with at the time, working a load up. Now I've got same caliber but a different gun, and I'm having to go back from scratch, so that's where it's at. So what makes a good manual? I think it involves different facets, from the powder profile selection, which could be used, falls back to the description of the cartridge at the beginning of each section. People that worked with it will say, this powder gives good results. This one's a universal. It doesn't do the best, but it'll do multiple calibers and what have you. Certain bullet weights are usually better. One thing about Lyman, even though it doesn't have the velocity brackets, they've also got their cast bullet handbook, and this is to also help sell their molds, but You can also use it as far as the starting data as a reference point for some of the Lee bullet molds, because unless you've got Lee dies, sometimes they don't list the starting and max as far as their cast bullets go. And I've got a Lee manual, and it's probably my least favorite because they've omitted some of the data on the military cartridges, like the 7.7 Japanese, 6.5 Japanese, which I bought the dies from them for, which had a small section of reloading data to start with, and it's kind of disappointing if you ask me. Another thing that makes a good manual is recommendations, because with the 223 you can use stick powder and use regular small rifle primers. Now you switch to a ball powder, which is a little harder to ignite. The manual may recommend a small Magnum primer or a Benchrest primer to get the little extra heat that comes out of it. One thing about reloading manuals, you can have too many of them when you first start out, and some of these books contradict each other. The main thing is get one that's not partial to powders, say like the Lyman or the Sierra or the Hornady, whichever one that you're going to use the bullets for, and work your loads up from there. If you get one by a powder manufacturer, it's going to be pretty much, well, maybe not as much as it used to with the Hodgdon, since they own most of the powder companies. The only ones they haven't swallowed up yet is Alliant, which used to be Hercules, that makes the Bullseye, Unique, the 2400 Magnum pistol powder. Now, if you're going to be chronographing loads, bear in mind, if you're shooting a 16-inch carbine and your data from your manual was set up with a 22-inch barrel, there's going to be a discrepancy of a couple hundred feet per second at least. When it comes to handguns, your Magnum cartridges are probably going to be rated from a 4 to 6 inch revolver, so if you have a 2-inch snub nose, you're not going to get as much oomph out of it. Your semi-automatics, most of them are probably going to be rated for a 4 or 5 inch barrel, so if you got a compact like my Taurus G3C with a 3-inch barrel, you're going to lose some velocity there. So don't be mad at the manuals. Just keep that in mind whenever you're chronographing stuff. Every once in a while, you may want to upgrade the manuals because new cartridges come out. It's like a few years back, I bought the 6.5 Creedmoor. Nobody really had any data, or none of my manuals had data in it. So I had to start all over again. I think Sierra, you might be able to order pages for newer calibers. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check into that. If they don't, they kind of need to. It would be a hell of a subscription service that they could offer. Also, maybe amendments as far as new powders coming out. IMR and Hodgdon, both, since they're owned by the same company, they're developing new powders that, different numbers, different names. I didn't even know of past 10 years because I've been using the same style powders for the past 30 years. If I find something that works, I stick with it. Am I saying I'm a great reloader? No, but I know enough of the basics, the technique to show somebody. I did have some reloads from old Swedish Mauser that would cut bullet holes at 200 yards when my eyes was still decent. When it come to military matches, did I win them? No, because I was up against more modern rifles with tighter tolerances and peep sights versus the old ladder or slider type military sights. I've also developed what I consider a good self-defense load for my 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. That had a good velocity, lighter bullet for a little bit less recoil. And that was almost on the heels of the some of the 357 loads, or 357 SIG loads, I should say. 135 grain bullet, and I forget how much it was pushing, but it was close to the 9mm nip, but it wasn't showing any excess pressure. And they will also tell you in these manuals, you switch from one load of powder, or one lot, which is, you know, they make one batch of powder, it gets a lot number. They come back a few months later, make another batch of it after they fulfill their orders. They will tell you to maybe back off the charge and work your way back up, because some of the differences in the manufacturing may creep up. In conclusion, the main thing is start off slow with the slower loads, work your way up. There's nothing wrong with trading a little bit of velocity for more accuracy if you've got enough muzzle energy to put down an animal when you're hunting, like a deer. Now, if you're doing long range work for elk, mule deer, antelope, you're going to have to go probably with the highest velocity with the most accuracy, which means you're going to have to do a lot of prep. But around here in North Carolina, western part, we've got maybe 100, 200 yard shots. You can fudge a little bit of velocity in long range performance for accuracy, closer range accuracy, I should say. The deer aren't that big around here. Friends from up north call them Labradors for some reason, because they're smaller. They eat the corn-fed bucks they got up there in Ohio and Indiana. But I'm going down a different rabbit hole, folks. Hope this kind of points you in the right direction if you're a newer reloader. If you're an older reloader, you might think I'm full of it. Hopefully, if you're an experienced reloader, I've made some decent points, maybe brought up some stuff that you hadn't considered yet, and just go from there. Well, folks, this is Rant and Fury. Take care, have a nice evening, and catch you next time.